Could have shown a video, but instead I'm going to read this little transcript to you. You maybe remember this moment from the 2016 Golden Globes, and it goes like this. There's a little voiceover. And to present the award, please welcome two-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And Jim Carrey comes out and says this. Thank you. I am two-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey. You know, when I'm going to sleep at night, I'm not just a guy going to sleep. I'm two-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey going to get some well-needed shut-eye. And when I dream, I just don't dream any old dreams. No, sir. I dream about being three-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey. Because then I would be enough. It would finally be true. And I could stop this terrible search for what I know ultimately won't fulfill me. But these are important, these awards. I don't want you to think just because if you blew up our solar system, you wouldn't be able to find us or any of human history with the naked eye from our perspective, but this is huge. So one more time, here are the nominees for Best Motion Picture Comedy. Sometimes perspective is a helpful thing. What I want to talk about today is identity formation, which feels like this massive existential conceptual kind of thing. And so how do you take identity formation and make it something that's just not in your head, but something that you can feel in your heart and in your gut, in your body, and that you experience? Because identity is something that we're all growing in. And what I would say that so much of the good news in the gospel of Jesus is about your transformation, what you are becoming, who you are becoming. And I think that it's so much deeper and personal for us. I think so many of us were given a good news that wasn't helpful, that wasn't interesting. It sounded like bad news. And I think that where Jesus is taking us on this journey of good news is actually quite interesting. So to talk about identity formation, we're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about the Golden Globes, which we already did. And if we can do that, then we can talk about my student. If we can talk about my student, then a story that I used to share in here all the time, but I'll share it again, Rabbi Akiva, my friends. And if we can do that, then I will tell you how I was a pancake kind of guy. And if I can tell you about a pancake guy, then we can talk about some surrender. And if we can talk about surrender, then the Fellowship of the Rings. Thank you for the 4 nerds in here. Let's go. And if we can talk about Fellowship of the Rings, then we can talk about invitation. Follow along with me as we read Mark chapter 8. It goes like this. Jesus and his disciples, nope, that's not how it goes. Is that how it goes? Yeah. Yeah, it's up there, but okay, whatever, great. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus warned them all not to tell anyone about him. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. Talk about an inspiring speech. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." And then he called the crowd back to him, along with the disciples, and he said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it." I don't know about you, but when I introduce myself at cocktail parties, and particularly on airplanes, the one thing that I never introduce myself as a pastor, because that's awkward and weird. There's nothing quite like being on an airplane. If I tell somebody that I'm a pastor, one of two things is going to happen. Thing number one time I'm on an airplane, and the gentleman just told me about all of the fun things that he had done before at a certain type of gentleman's club, and the wonderful time he was having at this bachelor party, and then he proceeds to tell me, "And what do you do?" And then he goes on to say, "I don't normally do those kind of things. We're just kind of one of those moments. And man, and I'm like, that's all right. Yeah, I'm not here. I'm not judging. It's not one of those." Or even worse than that, I get this person, the fundamentalist. They are a good time. "So what do you think about Jeremiah 32? I don't want to do this right now. I don't want to talk about pre-trib or post-trib or what Kirk Cameron movie you just watched. I don't want this in my life. So thankfully, I've got other gigs, and I'll say one of those things, or I'll just go with life coach, and then usually I just do what any other good human being does on an airplane. I put my headphones in and pretend I'm sleeping. Thank you. The head nods are there. But we're all trying to be something in the world. We all have an identity that we take on. Most of the time, the identities that we initially took on were just given to us. You didn't pick what family you were going to be born into. You didn't pick what skin color you were going to have. You didn't pick what country you were born into, what language you were going to speak, if your family was going to be traumatic or not traumatic. You didn't really pick any of those things. You were just given that. You didn't pick your birth order, and you didn't pick what your cousins would call you at the Christmas table. That was just given to you. And you have lived into that identity for many parts of your life. And then you spend a significant part of your life trying to undo yourself from that identity. Sound familiar? I remember one of my identities that I would live into when I was a teenager is I was a fast-growing boy, and so whenever I was at my Mimi and Papa's house, I would always eat like 18 pancakes. I remember feeling so full, but that's just who I was. I was the pancake guy. I ate them. That was my job. I didn't want to eat any more pancakes, but I felt like I had to do it because that's who I was in the family. I remember being at school, and the truth is I was just insecure. The truth is my sophomore year of high school, I got really bad acne, and I didn't know how to handle it, and so I wanted to be the funny guy because it would take me out from looking at the mirror and just being so insecure about the acne that I had on my face. And so I continued to be the funny guy because that's who I was. I remember being in Christianity. I had to be a certain type of evangelical. I was going to be the best evangelical. I'm in Enneagram 3, for God's sake. Right? I'm going to out-evangelize, out-pray, outdo anyone else. I'm going to do it more charismatically. I'm going to do it with, a better communication. That's just who I'm going to be. How many of you grew up in those worlds, and that's just the type of Christian that you had to be? I remember going to my aunt's church, and at my aunt's church, of course, they spoke in tongues. So now I speak in tongues, Caroline. We all just take on these identities, and then we sit with these identities. And in a place like New Abbey, so many of us have been deconstructing. That's a fancy word that came around really 10 years ago because of a guy named Richard Rohr. And you're trying to let go so much of your faith identity. But the hard work, really the hard work is forming your identity. Saying, who do I actually want to be in this world? What's compelling to me? And I think that's so much of what Jesus is trying to do in this story. What I love about this story is that Jesus doesn't give you this in chapter 1 because it's too much. If you're just like on the shore and Jesus is like, if you want to follow me, you have to take up your cross and die to yourself. You'd be like, I'm out of here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Instead, it's deeper into the story that Jesus begins to talk about these things. Because what Jesus is really inviting us into when he says, follow me, is I'm inviting you into this process of transformation. I'm inviting you into this process of healing and understanding who God is. I use this Richard Rohr line in here all of the time. What Jesus came to do is not make God, what do I say? You guys know the line? Who was the line? Did I just have a complete brain fart? Jesus didn't come to... Thank you so much. That's really helpful for you. Jesus didn't come to change God's mind about you. Jesus came to change your mind about God. And that's a powerful line for us, that Jesus is transforming us and giving us space so that we can have a better understanding of who God is. And then when we have a better understanding of who God is, then maybe we can have a better understanding of who we are. As we talk about formation, I just want to think about 3 words that we can hold with us today. The words are this: awareness, surrender, and fellowship. Fellowship is like such an old school Christian word, but go with me on this one a little bit. So let me think about awareness. Awareness, I think, is challenging for a lot of people, but awareness is something that you can practice on your own. You don't need like suffering or trauma to get to awareness. Honestly, you need to read like half of an Enneagram book. Like you can get awareness just like a little bit of Instagram if you're following the right post, right? Or a good friend can bring you to awareness. Just to a place of, oh, I have a deeper understanding of who I am, or maybe I have a narrative that I want for myself moving forward. One of my favorite things that I've ever done in the world is just participate in executive coaching. Not only just receiving it for myself, but also getting to be an executive coach. What I love about it is this process of talking about awareness with people. And one of the most difficult questions that we ask, it is the question that we ask, is what do you want? And it takes a year for people to honestly uncover that. Because we've all just shown up in all of our costumes, and we've all just showed up in the identities that we think that we ought to have. We just find ourselves in a particular area of life, maybe vocationally or relationally or ideologically, and I guess this is who I'm supposed to be. And yet there's something deep within you that's quite uncertain if this is who I should be or ought to be. And to answer the question of what do I want feels nearly impossible. Because if I were to honestly answer that question, it might lose some things. I might risk some things. I might have to do some things, and I'd rather not bring it up than be forced into the opportunity of that. And self-awareness can be terrifying at times, to ask ourselves this deeper question of, what do I actually want? I think where I go with this story is that Jesus is inviting us into this identity formation of asking us what we want. When I look at the life of Jesus, and when you look at the story, a couple things are already happening here. One of the things is that Jesus is going through his own identity formation. Everybody wants Jesus to be a specific thing. We see this in the stories. Jesus' mom wants him to be a specific thing. The religious leaders want Jesus to be a specific thing. His disciples want something specific from him. People are looking for a very particular type of Messiah. They're looking for a very particular type of leader. And Jesus doesn't present it all to them at once. He eventually gives it some space. But mostly what Jesus does for a long part of the gospel is that Jesus shows you who his identity is. Jesus shows you what his formation is about. We say this phrase in here a lot, and I'll say it again and again until it seeps into you. One of the great things about Jesus is that Jesus just leaves everybody better than he finds them. And that what Jesus invites us into as we follow him is that we would become people who leave people better off better off after they find us. Man, I'm losing all of my words today. Anybody just tired? Yeah. You get where I'm going here. The identity of Jesus is constantly inviting us into letting parts of ourselves go, and more importantly, picking parts of ourselves up. But it takes time. And so Jesus in here is he's saying, whoever would follow me. The invitation is to everybody. It's one of my favorite parts of this passage, is that he's having this intimate moment with his disciples, where they're on the hill and they're having the private conversation, and Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And even they're not fully seeing it. So Jesus goes back to the entire crowd. And there's always this juxtaposition in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus is with the crowd or he's with his disciples. And in this moment, he goes back for everyone. He says, whoever. This is an invitation for everybody. Whoever would be my disciple. Disciple is just simply the word for student. Whoever would be my student, right? That they're going to follow me in this very particular way. And how Jesus invites us into being the student is Jesus already shown us so much of who he is and what his character is about. And I think who Jesus is compelling. I think that I grew up in a world that the story of Jesus wasn't that compelling, it was just scary. There was always something that I had to do to be a part of the story of Jesus, because I didn't. The consequences were grave. It was eternal damnation for one. Talk about a great story to tell a 5-year-old. It was the tribulation or the rapture for another. Talk about a great story to tell a 7-year-old. That there was these big consequences for Jesus. But instead, I think what I see Jesus at this point in my life is that Jesus is just simply inviting me into a process of formation. Jesus is just simply modeling for me the best of what humanity could be and the best of who God could be. And my kids show me that in the best ways. Again, when I'm up there in Lake Arrowhead and we're talking to these kids, it's so simple how they understand Jesus. It's so powerful how they talk about who God is. They don't have existential, apologetic, theological questions about the existence of God or the problems of evil. They just simply see God as somebody who is kind and who is good and who is loving. And that's who God is. And if God is this way, then if we are students of this way of life, then we are kind and we are good and we are loving. What a much more simple story to follow, without all of the other randomness that we're often given. And so I think Jesus invites us into this life of awareness, this life of looking at ourselves. First of all, do we just simply want to be a student of this way of life? And then Jesus invites us into a life of surrender. Surrender goes like this. Surrender, Jesus says, would you take up your cross and follow me? Surrender is very different than awareness. Awareness is something that you can get to, kind of on your own. Awareness is something that you can grab onto. Surrender, I don't know any other way to surrender except through suffering. I just don't. It's not enjoyable. No one picks it. Cross is not some fancy thing that you wear. Cross is like an execution device. Cross, it sucks, right? But Jesus is saying dying to yourself, losing yourself, grief, loss is painful. When you finally have to go to your family and for the first time you let them know, this is not who I am anymore. I'm not the pancake guy. Oh, I don't actually believe that about the Bible. First time I've shared this one here before, that you get a text from your cousin in the middle of the night and says, you are leading people to the second lake of fire because you love gay people. Hi, Tim, how are you? I haven't seen you in like a year. Is your mother okay? Like, weird thing to text people. Because I'm just not that guy anymore. I'm not who you thought I was. It's painful. It's painful never going to a Thanksgiving dinner again. You know, like the memories come up on your phone? And like from 8 years ago, I remember I saw the last Thanksgiving that I was ever at with my family. And it was like, oh yeah, we were at the zoo together, right? Earlier that week. I remember my kids hanging out with my cousins, my kids hanging out with my cousins' kids, and to know that my kids would have no idea who they are. It was painful. It was loss. And so many of you, oof, you know that loss. You've been so brave. You've had to be so brave. You got here. Maybe you didn't think you were going to get here. You were so brave that eventually you had to be who you are, and you should be who you are. Sometimes it comes at a loss. Sometimes it comes with grief. Almost always it comes with suffering. And Jesus is just being honest with you about that. If you want to be my student, this will be the way. It's not for everybody. Jesus isn't punishing you if you don't do it. He's not chastising you. He's not giving you guilt or shame. He's just being honest about the journey and the path. You're going to have to be my student. If you're my student, there's going to be a lot of awareness along the way, and it's going to be like any student, work and practice that you have to walk into. If you want to follow me, you're going to have to pick up a cross. Somewhere along the way, you're going to lose something, change something, have a death of something, right? But then eventually Jesus will say, but if you come follow me, you'll actually find your life. What I love about that with Jesus is that in the stories we constantly see that there's this like reality of fellowship going on. And what it is that none of us do this thing alone. I reflect on this quite a bit when I think about the life of New Abbey. I came from evangelical megachurch world. And I think in that world, some of the best of it, I think what we did really well in that world is honestly like kick-ass worship services. Like really, really good. Like, have you ever been to like an old mainline denomination? Yeah, not really, really good. Like, no one's ever like, yes! Yeah, that's not a thing. It's not. It's different. It might be beautiful. It might be liturgical. It might be whatever, but you're not like, I was just at a Justin Bieber concert, you know? Like, you have like cocaine for Jesus. That's what evangelical megachurch does for you. And it feels good. I'm not mocking, like it really feels good. There's something beautiful about that. I was in Eswatini, Africa this summer, and I was talking to one of the leaders there. And it was such a fascinating thing when you get other people's perspective on your world. And he says to me, I think God has so blessed the United States of America because of how you worship him. I was like, again, I know all of you cringed. That's great. But this is just this man's perspective in Eswatini, right? Because he's been to the U.S., and he's been to like these mega churches, and he's just like, whatever that was awesome. That was awesome, you know? Lights, fog, like that was good. Like that's, yeah. It's like the 80s, and it was great. I don't know where that came from. That was great. That was good. But that's not who we are. That's not what we do as New Abbey. So I'm always trying to figure out how do we get to the thing that I think Jesus is actually interested in, which is discipleship, which is being a student of him, which is awareness, which is learning to surrender, which is following. And I think that we only do that through community. And that's just so hard. It's just really, really hard. And to be honest, I'm not trying to be cynical. It's not even a critique. I'm just trying to have an objective reality here. I just don't think the church in the United States has done that well for a long time. We just don't know how to be students. We know how to make people good churchgoers. We know how to teach people theology. We know how to give people a conceptual, apologetic, theological understandings of who God is. We actually do that quite well. We are really, really struggle with transformation. We really, really struggle with community at times. We really, really struggle with living in this practicing a way of Jesus community. But here's what I know, and I know this because of 12-step groups. It is the only way you will find life. You have to practice it, and you have to practice it with other people. You need the power of the fellowship, right? You need the power of other people around you who are also practicing that way of life. And to be honest, there's been so many seasons of New Abbey where like we've done all of the progressive things. We've done patriarchy and anti-racism and this and that, right? You name the thing, and I promise you we've spent time talking about it. And I think that's good. That's an awareness thing. We're just giving a bigger perspective to what the universe is and our experiences. That's not the same as following Jesus. It's just not. Those things will increase your view of the world, but transformation, I think, comes when we follow Jesus, this way of Jesus. And I'm not saying that there's not other things that can't work in the world, but I am saying this is a church. That's what we do here. That's why you're sitting here, because at some level you believe that as well. I'm not the exclusive whatever, and this. No. I'm just saying that Jesus is saying this way can work if you want to follow it. But you guys got to do it together. That's one of the most powerful realities about Jesus, is eventually he's like, peace out, everybody. Now it's your turn. Now it's your turn to go teach other people this self-awareness. Now it's your turn to go take up crosses and to share your story. That's the power of a 12-step group. That's the power of the room in New Abbey. That there's somebody else here who has a story about losing family, and you needed to hear that today. There's somebody else here who had to come out, and when good news was shared, it gave you hope that you could come out as well. There's somebody here who's in the middle of addiction, and you heard someone talk about 10 years of sobriety in this room, and you needed that reality. That's what we bring for one another at first. There's this no questions, no explanation needed, I just get it. And now the next invitation, I think, for us, New Abbey, is, will we practice this way with one another? This way that leaves people better than we found them. This way that can lead to healing. This way that can lead to transformation. This way that can shape our identity. Maybe you're in a place where you're just in awareness and you're just coming to a greater perspective of who you are or who others are or who God is. Maybe you're in a season where your word is surrender. There's death, there's loss, there's change, there's figuring it out. It feels a little bit overwhelming. Thank God for our story, that it never ends there. There is always resurrection. And how do I know that? Because you are here today. You've made it this far. You will make it even further. Maybe where you're at is you need fellowship. You're like, I'm there. I want to do this thing with other people. And maybe it's not just people in this room, but I want to do this thing. And I want to give my way to a life because I want a new identity. I want to answer these deeper questions of who I actually want to be and how I actually want to show up in the world in a different way. Would you find those same 3 or 4 people around you, and would you answer this question? What word do you need for your identity formation? Maybe it's awareness, maybe it's surrender, maybe it's fellowship. It's a kind of conceptual question. You guys are adults. Enjoy.